Hello everyone, welcome to History and Culture. After the Xinhai Revolution, the Qing dynasty completely withdrew from the historical stage. And the last emperor, Puyi, became the final ruler of the Forbidden City. His life was filled with legend. And the dark secrets that took place within the Forbidden City are almost unimaginable. Unless narrated by Puyi himself. According to public records, during the reign of Emperor Guangxu, both Empress Dowager Cixi and Emperor Guangxu were gravely ill and had little time left. Before her death, Cixi decided on the succession, choosing Puyi, the youngest son of Prince Chun, Zaifeng. According to the tradition of the Prince Chun's family, the eldest son would leave his mother and be raised by his grandmother after his first month. Thus, Puyi grew up under the meticulous care of his grandmother, Lu Jiaxi, until he was 3 years old. However, his fate was drastically altered that year. When Lu Jiaxi received the Imperial Edict that Puyi was to enter the palace and ascend the throne, her heart was torn. Her 2 sons had already been adopted by Empress Dowager Cixi, and had suffered greatly from the separation. Now, her 3-year-old grandson was to be taken away. This news caused her to faint immediately. Puyi, too, did not want to leave his grandmother and cried uncontrollably. In the end, the officials, unable to persuade him, allowed his wet nurse to secretly carry him into the palace while feeding him. The very next day, Emperor Guangxu passed away. After Emperor Guangxu's death, the ministers gathered at the Qianqing Palace to mourn and prepare for his funeral. However, not long after, Empress Dowager Cixi also passed away, plunging the entire Forbidden City into chaos. In order to bury these 2 powerful figures, the ministers had to hastily change the location of Cixi's funeral to the Huangji Hall. With the deaths of the 2 rulers who controlled the fate of the Qing court, the entire dynasty fell into disarray. To stabilize the situation, and following the principle that the country cannot be without a ruler for even a day, the ministers decided that just half a month after the deaths of Cixi and Guangxu, the 3-year-old Puyi would ascend to the throne. The coronation ceremony was set for November 9th, to take place in the Hall of Supreme Harmony. On the day of his coronation, Puyi was dressed in a heavy dragon robe and was carried into the Hall of Supreme Harmony. He clearly had no understanding of what was happening. Faced with the grandeur of the ceremony and the kowtowing officials, the young child cried uncontrollably throughout the event. The officials quickly ordered the eunuchs to carry Puyi to the side and try to calm him down. While soothing him, the eunuchs whispered, "It's almost over, almost over. You'll be able to go home soon." This simple phrase, meant to comfort the child, caused the officials present to turn pale. It seemed as though these unintentional words became an ominous prophecy. Thus, amid crying and confusion, Puyi was pushed onto the throne, becoming the last ruler of a decaying dynasty. And the fall of the Qing dynasty quietly began. Historical records show that although Puyi was forced to abdicate just 3 years after his coronation, he continued to live in the Forbidden City until November 5, 1924, when he was expelled. As the last emperor of the Qing dynasty, Puyi was deeply influenced by Western culture from an early age. In his later years, he wrote an autobiography titled My First Half of Life, which detailed his life in the Forbidden City and exposed many little-known secrets. In the 12th month of the 3rd year of Emperor Xuantong's reign, Empress Dowager Longyu issued the abdication edict on behalf of Puyi. However, under the terms of the preferential treatment accorded to the Qing imperial family, Puyi was allowed to continue living in the Forbidden City. As a result, his childhood was largely spent within the confines of this imperial palace. In his memoirs, Puyi recalled that whenever he thought of his childhood, his mind was filled with a jaundiced hue, as nearly everything around him was a bright yellow. His clothes, bedding, tableware, and even the fabric used to wrap books were all this imperial yellow. This color, reserved exclusively for the emperor. constantly reminded Puyi that he was the son of heaven, a being of supreme status. This sense of singular supremacy even extended to the details of his interactions with his family. When Puyi was 11 years old, his younger brother, Fujia, and his sisters were brought into the palace to play with him. Initially, the children seemed somewhat restrained by the formalities of palace etiquette. But they quickly grew comfortable and filled the room with laughter. After tiring themselves out, they lay on the kong, a traditional heated platform, to rest. At this moment, Puyi inadvertently noticed the color of the undergarment peeking out from Fujia's sleeve. It was a familiar bright yellow. Puyi's face instantly darkened, and he sternly asked, "Is this imperial yellow? Do you think you're entitled to wear this color?" Terrified, Fujia quickly stood up, lowering his head and remaining silent. Moments earlier, they had been carefree siblings playing together. But now their relationship had transformed into something more akin to master and servant. The room was filled only with the cautious murmurs of the palace maids and eunuchs, replying with respectful, "Yes, your majesty." Puyi's lofty demeanor was fully on display. And the brotherly camaraderie seemed to vanish into thin air. Throughout Puyi's upbringing, this sense of superiority had long been ingrained in his daily life. He was entirely accustomed to, and even complacent about, the ritual of servants kneeling and kowtowing before him. This sense of grandeur extended beyond ceremonial acts and was reflected in his daily life. In his memoirs, Puyi described his everyday life as one of extreme opulence, with dining being the most extravagant aspect of all. The meals prepared for Empress Dowager Longyu were particularly elaborate, requiring 6 tables to hold the dishes for each meal. While young Puyi's setup was comparatively modest, his meals still included over 30 dishes per sitting. Regarding the purpose of these dishes, Puyi recalled in his writings that they went through multiple meticulous preparations before being placed on the dining table. Only to serve as mere displays, he would never touch them. It seems almost unbelievable, aren't meals meant to be eaten? Why were they left untouched? As it turned out, to ensure that the emperor's order of "serve the meal" could be immediately fulfilled, the imperial kitchen often prepared the dishes half a day, or even an entire day, in advance. The dishes were kept simmering over a low flame, always ready to be served. However, by the time they were actually placed on the table, they were far from fresh. As a result, emperors throughout history would never eat these prepared dishes. So, what did the emperor actually eat? In reality, most of the food Puyi consumed was simple home-cooked dishes arranged and sent by the Empress Dowager, or Dowager Consort. If the Empress Dowager had passed away, the responsibility for arranging meals fell to the Dowager Consort. Aside from food, another indispensable element in Puyi's life was the constant presence of eunuchs and palace maids ready to serve him. Wherever he went, a long retinue of attendants would follow. If Puyi went on outings, such as trips to the summer palace, the spectacle was even grander. Dozens of cars would follow in a grand procession, with personnel stationed along the route to ensure security. At the front of the procession was a eunuch from the Department of Internal Affairs leading the way, followed by 2 chief eunuchs. If Puyi was carried in a sedan chair, 2 junior eunuchs would stand on either side, ready to attend to him at a moment's notice. Since eunuchs and palace maids were integral to Puyi's daily life, his memoirs reveal many behind-the-scenes details about them. In Puyi's recollections, eunuchs were not only essential figures in his childhood but also his companions and early tutors. From dressing and eating to studying and playing, he relied on the care of eunuchs. Puyi most frequently interacted with the eunuchs of the Yangxin Hall, while the junior eunuchs assigned specifically to him managed his clothing and meals. Above these junior eunuchs were chief eunuchs, and all eunuchs were ultimately overseen by Grand Eunuch Zhang Qianhe and Deputy Grand Eunuch Ruan Jinshou. While some eunuchs enjoyed great prestige and influence due to their power or connections, Most lower-ranking eunuchs lived in poverty, often struggling to make ends meet. To earn extra income, eunuchs would rack their brains for creative schemes. In Puyi's memoirs, he recounts that during the reigns of Emperor Tongzhi and Emperor Guangxu, extortion by eunuchs was commonplace. For example, during Emperor Tongzhi's wedding, the Imperial household department was busy managing affairs, but overlooked a group of eunuchs. These eunuchs took advantage of the celebratory occasion to cause trouble, claiming that a piece of glass in the main hall had cracked. Fearing a delay in the festivities, the Imperial household department quickly negotiated with them. The eunuchs offered to quietly replace the glass to avoid disrupting the event. Helpless, the department handed over some silver, and the glass was promptly fixed. It was only later discovered that the so-called crack was merely a hair stuck onto the glass. In another instance, an official named Chong Luan failed to properly bribe the eunuchs and was deliberately splashed with water, ruining his mink coat. As he was about to meet the Empress Dowager, Chong Luan was frantic. At that moment, the eunuchs helpfully provided a spare mink coat for him to change into. Afterward, Chong Luan had to pay a hefty sum for the high rental fee. Notably, by Puyi's time, corruption among eunuchs had become even more rampant. They not only extorted money but also engaged in theft, arson, and even violence. After the 1911 revolution, while the Forbidden City appeared calm on the surface, chaos had already taken root within. Some eunuchs opened opium dens and gambling houses inside the palace or even secretly sold cultural relics to cover their tracks. They would go as far as setting fires to destroy evidence. The more powerful eunuchs flaunted their authority, often accompanied by 4 or 5 junior eunuchs carrying clothing bundles, opium pipes, and water flasks, or walking pet Pekingese dogs for entertainment. Ruan Jinsho, one of the eunuchs close to Puyi, was a typical example. As the deputy grand eunuch, he carried himself with an air of superiority, regarding himself as a second-rank court official and leading an extremely lavish lifestyle. It is reported that Ruan Jinsho lived a life of extraordinary luxury. At home, he commanded servants and maids, while outside, he had a dedicated carriage at his service. He kept several fine horses for his entertainment and leisure. His extravagant lifestyle far exceeded the standards expected of an ordinary eunuch. Another eunuch, surnamed Tang, who managed official cases, was even more indulgent. He once spent $500 silver on a Tibetan Mastiff. This dog was as large as a small donkey, had a coat patterned like a tiger's, and bore a distinctive king character on its forehead. To care for the dog, Tang specifically assigned a eunuch as its attendant. Later, the dog caught the eye of Puyi, who took it for himself. According to historians, the salaries of eunuchs were generally low. Most received no more than 100 yuan per month, with lower-ranking eunuchs earning merely a dozen or so yuan. This was far from enough to support a lavish lifestyle. So, where did their wealth come from? In the late Qing dynasty, influential eunuchs amassed wealth primarily through bribery. They colluded with nobles, officials, and provincial governors, acting as intermediaries to facilitate connections between the court and the outside world. After the 1911 revolution, external bribery diminished, but corruption within the palace remained rampant. Ministers of the Imperial household department and eunuchs worked together, not only stealing palace artifacts but also pawning them to banks for kickbacks. Naturally, the eunuchs took their share of these profits. Moreover, newly appointed eunuchs had to apprentice under a senior, well-established eunuch to learn court etiquette and rules. During holidays, apprentices were expected to present gifts to their mentors. Those who gave generously were more likely to be promoted, while those who gave less could remain in lowly positions for life. This apprenticeship system effectively created small factions. Within these factions, mentors and apprentices shielded one another. Engaged in favoritism, and formed an internal network of power among eunuchs. As a result, powerful eunuchs, with access to various illicit incomes, lived comfortably, some even rivaling nobles in wealth. In stark contrast, most lower-ranking eunuchs lived in abject poverty. Their meager monthly wages of around 10 yuan were further strained by the need to present gifts to their mentors during festivals. Many were burdened by gambling debts or opium addiction, leaving their lives in ruin. When these impoverished eunuchs found themselves deeply in debt, they resorted to stealing palace property to repay what they owed. Over time, theft became increasingly rampant, further disrupting the already chaotic order within the Forbidden City. Starting in 1922, a series of treasure thefts occurred in the Forbidden City. For instance, 2 gold bells weighing over 100 jin each were stolen from the Hall of Longevity, along with dozens of precious bronze artifacts. The Palace of Tranquil Longevity lost numerous gold items, ancient weapons, and jade artifacts. At the Palace of Heavy Harmony, a dowager consort was robbed of 10,000 yuan in cash. Even a newly acquired diamond belonging to Puyi mysteriously vanished. In his memoirs, Puyi recounted one of the most shocking incidents, his wedding. When the Empress donned her phoenix crown, it was discovered that all the jewels on the crown had been covertly replaced with counterfeits by the eunuchs, leaving the true treasures nowhere to be found. According to some historians, the treasures of the Forbidden City are world-renowned, and many have coveted these rare and exquisite items. The reason eunuchs were able to steal these treasures with ease lies in the fact that, over the centuries of the Ming and Qing dynasties, most of the wealth accumulated by the emperors remained within the palace. Although some were lost during wars, the majority stayed in the Forbidden City. However, such a vast collection of treasures was never thoroughly catalogued. Some items were recorded in ledgers, but many had no documentation at all. This gave the eunuchs an opportunity to act. After all, stealing a few items would go unnoticed. According to Puyi's recollections, theft in the palace at that time was like a catastrophic plundering. From eunuchs to officials, almost everyone was involved in stealing. The eunuchs carried out secret thefts by sneaking in and breaking locks, while officials and ministers took advantage of the pretense of borrowing for appreciation to pawn cultural relics, eventually claiming them as their own and selling them off. Puyi recalled that when he was 16, he once ordered eunuchs to open a storeroom in the Jianfu Palace. The storeroom had not been opened for 100 years and was filled with large boxes, some still bearing seals from the Zetian era. When he saw the room full of rare treasures, a question arose in his mind: how much wealth did he truly own? These treasures before his eyes were fortunate to remain, but how many had already been stolen? To get a clearer understanding of his assets, Puyi decided to inventory the storerooms. However, this action not only failed to stop the thefts but made the looting even more rampant. Shockingly, during the inventory process, a massive fire broke out, burning down vast areas of the Forbidden City where treasures were stored. According to eyewitnesses at the time, the night of the fire was calm and windless, and the Jianfu Palace was unoccupied, with only a chief eunuch and 6 others on guard. Clearly, the fire was no natural accident but was likely set intentionally by the eunuchs to destroy evidence of their thefts. Some historians have commented that without Puyi's revelations, it would be difficult for later generations to imagine the extent of the madness, theft, and corruption that occurred in the Forbidden City during the turbulent late Qing era. The once sacred and inviolable Imperial Palace ultimately became a battleground for plundering wealth. This was not only a massive loss of treasures but also a vivid reflection of a dynasty in its final days. This is the History and Culture channel. Liking and subscribing are the greatest help and support to us. Thank you everyone and see you in the next time.